Hey, JJ here with the Art of Value. So today I want to talk about hype cycles as they relate to investing. And I'll put the first few seconds of this up on Twitter as usual. So click one of the links in the tweet if you want to see the full episode. So hype cycles. If you're on YouTube or Spotify video, you'll be able to see the graphical representation of the cycle, which you'll probably be familiar with. Where we have it's a line that goes up and down and then plateaus. So we have the technology trigger and the peak, and then it goes up to a peak of inflated expectations, down to a trough of disillusionment, and then up a more gentle slope of enlightenment to a plateau of productivity. So how it relates to investing, I think, especially, I mean, because it relates to technology, we can see, I think, recently, it definitely relates to a certain innovation tech bubble, I guess we could call it, that we've been seeing. Kind of plays. I think it'll play out pretty much like we're seeing here in the hype cycle. So anyway, this is just from Wikipedia, but it's also from the Gartner website. I think they got it. So it says a Gartner hype cycle is a graphical presentation developed, used, and branded by the American research advisory and information technology firm Gartner to represent the maturity, adoption, and social application of specific technologies. The hype cycle claims to provide a graphical and conceptual presentation of the maturity of emerging technologies through 5 phases. Okay, we'll go into these phases, and we're thinking about investing all the while, because if we think about the dot-com bubble or the TMT bubble, as it's sometimes called, technology, media, and telecoms. We have first we have the technology trigger, where a potential technology breakthrough kicks things off. Early proof of concept stories and media interest trigger significant publicity. Often no usable products exist and commercial viability is unproven. So we think about the innovation stocks that really took off during the pandemic. Largely unprofitable, but some of these are further along. But I think the general idea of the hype cycle still applies, and even Bitcoin boom and bust that we've had before. I'm not talking about the one now, the crypto pullback we've had, but definitely 2017 it was like this. It kind of followed the hype cycle, I think. But then it went into another bubble, and that can happen. This can be repeated more than once for technology or a set of technologies. I think this is just my opinion. So then we have the peak of after the technology trigger, we have the peak of inflated expectations. Early publicity produces a number of success stories, often accompanied by scores of failures. Some companies take action, most don't. Then we have the trough of disillusionment after the peak, which we could relate to a bust in the stock market. Interest wanes as experiments and implementations fail to deliver. Producers and the technology shake out and fail. Investment continues only if the surviving providers improve their products to the satisfaction of early adopters. And then we have the slope of enlightenment after the deep trough. And I think, if we're looking at, say, innovation stocks, we're heading into the trough of disillusionment, where some of them have lost 50, 60, 70, 80, 90%, which is pretty incredible. That's kind of like the dot-com bubble. And so we're disillusioned. Is this going to work? What's going to happen? And, the sectors here are EV sector, where Tesla worked, and then there are a lot of ones that follow that were way overvalued. We've got genomics. We've got all of these sectors that pretty much ARK invest in, where they say S curves feeding into S curves. Well, I think the hype cycle is kind of the curves that they're talking about. I'm not saying it won't work after we get to the plateau of productivity, but I think we have to go through this big roller coaster before we get there. So the slope of enlightenment is more instances of how the technology can benefit the enterprise start to crystallize and become more widely understood. Second and third generation products appear from technology providers. More enterprises fund pilots. conservative companies remain cautious. And then the plateau of productivity. Mainstream adoption starts to take off. Criteria for assessing provider viability are more clearly defined. The technology's broad market applicability and relevance are clearly paying off. If the technology has more than a niche market, then it will continue to grow. So we saw this, if you were around during the dot-com bubble, we saw exactly this, where the technologies, the internet was the latest thing, it was going to change, and there was hope for streaming video, web TV, which is 20 years later is just kind of mainstream and actually good now with Netflix and Spotify and so forth. But it was the inflated expectations, and then the deep trough in 2001, 2002, and then it took like a decade to really gain steam, and of course some of this, and so the companies that worked are some of the best companies in the world. So the flow of the plateau of productivity. So if you can see the video on the screen, there's a more detailed graph we've got on the left axis expectations and to the right time. So expectations and time, and it's laid out starting off with R&D, going startup companies first round. So it's what they, and then what they explained in those 5 stages. And we've got early adopters investigate further way up. Mass media begins the hype right at the top, and this is on the rise, and at the very peak we have activity beyond early adopters and hugely inflated expectations. Then just over the peak, the negative press begins, and you'll be noticing that about the innovation stocks and companies and emerging technologies, let's call them, as sort of more and more negative press. And we have they've got third round of venture capital funding on the way down. I don't know if that's always the case, but yes, if the ones that are believed in, otherwise some might just go to zero and not get any more funding. But I notice VCs are telling companies to tighten their belts now, and to be serious and aim towards profitability and just to batten down the hatches, which is not needed at the peak because everything was there's money flowing and the good publicity, and it was all blue sky. So, and then this plateau of productivity, slope of enlightenment, second generation products come out, some services, methodologies, and best practice developing, climbing the slope. And then we have at the sort of much further along the product of the plateau of productivity is high generation adoption phase starts. 20 to 30% of potential audiences have adopted the innovation. So again, I think back, it's too early with some of these innovations, except for, Tesla's just really taking off. Electric EVs are taking off all around the world. There's huge demand. But they did reach, when Rivian got to over 100 billion market cap, well over 100 billion, and they hadn't even produced pretty much a production car yet. That was one of the biggest bubble stocks, as I've said before, I think probably in the history of the stock market, I believe. For what it was, even the dot-com bubble, $100 billion at that stage was a lot. I think Microsoft was 600 billion at the peak, possibly. I think, is that right? Anyway, so that's pretty much it, and we have that's the gist of it. I've got this video to show. We can choose to watch it or not, but it just explains a little bit more. So here we go.
The ultimate value of the hype cycle, which we've seen proven out again and again, is that it provides an objective map that helps you understand the real risks and opportunities of an innovation, so you can avoid adopting something too early, giving up too soon, adopting too late, or hanging on too long. Here's how we do it. Gartner Hype Cycles chart the path an innovation takes, from when it first enters a market to when a typical business is likely to benefit from it. We look at specific technologies like, say, machine learning, as well as trends, concepts, methodologies, and management disciplines. Chances are, if it's generating buzz in the world and questions for you, we review it. There are currently 95 standard Gartner Hype Cycles. Some of the most popular include the hype cycles for emerging technologies, artificial intelligence,
AI,
and the digital workplace. As for how it works, we start by taking an objective look at the expectations surrounding an innovation. That's the y-axis. Then we relate it to the proven value of that innovation over time. That's the x-axis. Then moving from left to right, we track an innovation as it moves through 5 predictable phases, with some examples from recent hype cycles. Phase 1 is the innovation trigger. That's when an event like a technological breakthrough or a product launch gets people talking. Startups emerge, venture capital investment skyrockets, and first mover organizations start launching experiments. Phase 2 is the peak of inflated expectations. This is when the excitement brings in more suppliers and people using the product. There's a whole lot of media coverage and hype, but there's still...
So they've got on the screen, if you can't see it, they've got, as example, NFTs right now. And that's definitely gone through a hype cycle, which is over the peak now, I think, but there could be another one later on.
Limited proof that the innovation can deliver what you need. Then there's phase 3, the trough of disillusionment. This happens when the original excitement wears off and early...
Okay, and then this one, on the screen, they've got example of trough of disillusionment, chatbots and autonomous vehicles. Past the peak in autonomous vehicles, people are going, how long is it going to take? Even a few years ago, it's been going on for years about when it will happen, when it will be, and I think it will eventually happen and get to the plateau of productivity, but there's kind of quite a bit of bad press about it now.
Early adopters report predictable performance issues and low returns on investment. Phase 4, the slope of enlightenment. This is when early adopters see initial benefits, and others start to understand how to adapt the innovation to their organizations. Finally, we reach phase 5, the plateau of productivity. At this point, more users are seeing real-world benefits. The innovation goes mainstream. It often takes between 3 and 5 years for an innovation to move through the 5 phases. But, of course, the speed varies, and some don't stay the course. They disappear from the hype cycle or get replaced by something better.
Okay, that's all for that. So, just thinking about it, it takes 3 to 5 years. They talk about the main point here is that in terms of investing, I think there really is time. Like, back in 2020, people were saying stocks only go up. You've got to get in. FOMO, the fear of missing out. There really is there's no missing out, because often things get overexcited, and same with Bitcoin in 2017, and then it went up to 20,000 and then it was back down to 3,000. So could have waited, and I did. And I mean, you could have got it much earlier on, of course, at the beginning of the technological trigger, which often VCs are doing, but the companies aren't public at that point, so it's a different kind of investment. But later on, if you catch it at that trough of disillusionment, which I think some of these innovation stocks are happening right now, then that's a good time. As long as they're good and they're going to make it up the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. As long as, if you think of the .com, if you followed Amazon back then from the trough all the way up, it's been a massive success. And same with Google, even though that was later on, it started a bit later on, but a lot of tech seems to go through this cycle, and sometimes more than once. Alright, so that's all for today. So if you like and subscribe, and the video I said is on Spotify and YouTube, of course, and join me on Twitter at The Art of Value. Okay, see you next time.